The planet was silent, its surface cracked and barren. Dust storms often swept through the land, and the skies were filled with dark clouds that hid the distant sun. It was not a place that anyone would want to visit, yet here he was, on a mission he never signed up for. Private James Carter, a human soldier, stood next to the remains of his once proud scout ship. The metal hull was scarred from the battle with an enemy fleet, and now, alone on this forgotten world, he had to repair it. The ship's engines had failed during the fight, and he had barely managed to crash land on the planet. He had no choice but to get to work if he wanted to survive. His tools were scattered around him, and his fingers were covered in grease. The engine's core was the most critical part, and it was badly damaged. James took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. The work was slow, but he was used to long, tedious tasks. He knew how to fix things. Anything that could be repaired, he could do it. That's what soldiers were trained to do after all: survive, adapt, and fix what was broken. As James worked, a strange sound caught his attention. The faintest rustling of fabric, the sound of someone moving silently. He stood up quickly, scanning the area. He had thought the planet was uninhabited. There had been no signs of life when he arrived, but now there was someone watching. His hand moved to the weapon at his side, but he quickly hesitated. The figure was not an enemy. It was a woman, or rather an alien woman. She was standing just at the edge of a ruin, partly hidden by the crumbling stone walls of an old palace. Her features were unusual, even by alien standards. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, and her eyes, large and bright, shone with an otherworldly glow. She was tall, but her posture was not that of a soldier or warrior. Her movements were slow, almost graceful, as she stepped closer to him. James didn't know what to think. He had heard stories of the strange and often hostile creatures that roamed the galaxy, but this alien woman was different. She did not look like the violent species he had encountered before. Instead, there was something about her presence that was calming. She had an air of royalty about her, though her clothes were tattered and worn. The woman didn't speak at first. She simply watched him, her eyes studying him intently, as though she were curious about the human who had landed on her world. James, still holding his weapon loosely at his side, waited for her to make the first move. After a long moment, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it. "You are a lone human," she said, her words carrying an accent that was foreign to James. "Why are you here?" James hesitated. He wasn't sure how much he should reveal to her. In truth, he didn't even know what he was doing here himself. "I was in a fight," he said simply, his eyes never leaving her. "My ship was damaged. I crashed here." The woman's gaze flickered to the wreckage of the ship. She walked slowly toward it, her feet barely making a sound against the ground. "I see," she said, her tone more curious now. "It seems you are in need of help." James felt a strange pull toward her, a desire to trust her, but he had learned long ago never to trust anyone, especially not in situations like this. "I can handle it," he replied, turning back to his work. "I've got this." The woman, however, did not leave. She continued to stand there, watching him as he worked, her presence somehow soothing despite the foreignness of her. She didn't move, not for a long while. Eventually, James had to stop and look at her again. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "If you want to help, I don't need it." The alien woman smiled softly, a gentle expression that seemed almost out of place in this harsh, desolate world. "Perhaps you do not need help in fixing your ship, but you need something else, don't you?" James frowned. "What are you talking about? You are not the only one who is stranded," she said. "I too have been abandoned. My people, they left me here long ago." Her voice grew quieter as she spoke, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. "I have waited for someone to come." James didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to hearing such things from an alien, especially one who had the aura of royalty about her. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "If they abandoned you, why stay here?" She glanced at the sky, her expression distant. "There is no place for me elsewhere," she said. "I have waited, hoping for a time when I might find someone who will understand." James paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know what to say, so he went back to his work. It wasn't until much later, when he had finished the repairs, that he finally spoke again. My ship is fixed now. I can leave this. Placed. The woman nodded, though her gaze seemed distant. You can leave, yes, she said softly. But before you go, will you at least tell me your name? James, he said, surprised at how easily it came out. James Carter. Eyes softened as she repeated his name. James Carter, she murmured, as though she were testing the sound of it on her tongue. I am Princess Lyra, of the Valerian people. James blinked. He hadn't expected her to be royalty, but now that she had said it, it made sense. There was something about her that screamed nobility. Princess Lyra, he said, giving her a small nod. It's an honor to meet you. She smiled, though it was a sad smile. The honor is mine, James Carter. James was about to say something else, but before he could, the ground suddenly shook. The sky above darkened, and an unfamiliar sound filled the air, a low hum that vibrated through his bones. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. What is that? He asked, his voice tense. James stood still, listening to the hum that seemed to echo from the skies. His heart pounded in his chest as the sound grew louder, closer. It was unlike anything he had ever heard. His instincts told him to prepare for something dangerous, but he had no idea what. Who is it? James asked, looking at Princess Lyra with a furrowed brow. What's happening? Lyra's eyes narrowed as she looked up at the darkening sky. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of something darker in her gaze. It is my people, she said softly, her voice betraying a flicker of doubt. They have returned. James didn't know what to make of her words. If her people had left her here, why would they return now? Was it to rescue her, or was there something else behind their sudden arrival? The ground trembled again as a massive ship appeared from the clouds above. It was enormous, far bigger than anything James had ever seen before. Above them, its metallic surface glinting in the light of the dying day. The humming sound intensified as the ship's engines powered down, and it descended slowly to the ground. James instinctively reached for his weapon, but Lyra stopped him with a simple gesture. There's no need for that, she said quietly, though her voice held a warning. They are not here to fight. Not yet. James wasn't so sure. He had seen enough battles to know that a show of force could be a sign of something more dangerous. He glanced at Lyra, but she seemed calm, even resigned. He didn't understand why she wasn't more concerned. The ship touched down softly, the dust swirling around its massive frame as the door at the front of the ship slid open, revealing a group of figures in flowing robes. James could see that they were all tall, with skin of various shades of blue and purple. They were clearly not human, but their movements were graceful and dignified. One of them, a woman with dark hair and a silver crown on her head, stepped forward. She had the same regal presence as Lyra, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. The moment her gaze met Lyra's, something changed. There was tension in the air, a quiet understanding that neither of them voiced aloud. Lyra stepped forward to meet the woman, her posture proud yet cautious. You have come back, she said softly, though there was no joy in her voice. Why? The woman, who appeared to be the leader of the group, studied Lyra for a long moment. Then her gaze flicked to James, and a slight smile tugged at the corners of her lips. I see you have made a new friend, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. James didn't like the way she looked at him. He didn't trust her or the others who stood behind her, their eyes narrowed in suspicion. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that something was off. Lyra ignored the woman's comment and turned to James. This is my family, she said quietly. The Valerian people. James nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. If Lyra was royalty, why had she been left behind? Why had they abandoned her? The leader of the Valerian group stepped closer to Lyra, her eyes hardening. You were to stay hidden, she said sharply. The council has decided that your existence is a mistake. You should have stayed where we left you. Lyra's face hardened at the words, but she didn't respond immediately. James watched her carefully, trying to understand what was happening. Why was this woman, her own people, speaking to her like this? You left me behind, Lyra finally spoke, her voice full of quiet anger. You left me to die on this forsaken world, while you continued your lives without a second thought. And now you return, as if nothing has changed? The woman's eyes narrowed. You are a reminder of what we lost, she said, her voice cold. You are an embarrassment to the Valerian people. James took a step forward, his hand tightening around the grip of his weapon. He didn't like the way the conversation was going. He didn't like how Lyra was being treated. If you think you can just waltz in here and tell her what to do, you're mistaken, James said, his voice steady but full of warning. The leader of the Valerian group turned her gaze to James, her eyes flicking over him with a mixture of amusement and contempt. And what are you? A soldier, she sneered. You are nothing. You have no place here. Leave now, before you become a problem. James didn't move. He wasn't going to back down, not now, not after seeing Lyra's pain. He had a sense of honor, and right now, that meant standing beside her. Lyra stepped in front of him, her eyes filled with quiet strength. James is not the problem. You are, she said, her voice cold and full of authority. And you will leave or I will make you. The woman's eyes widened at Lyra's words. For a moment, there was a tense silence, broken only by the distant hum of the ship. James could feel the shift in the air, a change in the power dynamic. That was hard to ignore. The leader of the Valerians sneered and took a step back. You think you have power here? She laughed. You are nothing without us. You are a failure. James could see the hurt in Lyra's eyes, but there was also a flicker of determination. She wasn't going to let them walk all over her anymore. This is my life now, Lyra said firmly, her voice ringing with finality. I don't need you. I don't need any of you. The leader seemed taken aback by the sudden defiance. She turned sharply and motioned for the others to follow her. This isn't over, princess, she said coldly. We will return, and when we do, you will answer to the council. As the group of Valerians climbed back into their ship, James felt a sense of relief wash over him. Lyra had stood her ground, and she had done it without flinching. Thank you, Lyra said softly. Turning to James once the ship was gone, you didn't have to do that. James looked at her, his expression softening. I had to. No one should treat you like that. Lyra smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. You're right, but it's not easy even for me. Looking out at the horizon, I thought I had lost everything, but now I see I still have something. Be more than I realized. James nodded. You've got me, princess. She looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, James. You have no idea what that means to me. The wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel quite as harsh. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. James sat by the wreckage of his ship, staring out at the peaceful landscape. The tension from the previous day still hung in the air, but it felt different. Now there was a sense of calm, of quiet waiting. Princess Lyra sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the sky, her face thoughtful. The encounter with her people had left her shaken, but she hadn't shown it in front of them. James could tell that inside there was more pain than she let on. He could only imagine what it had been like for her, abandoned on this desolate planet, left to survive alone, while her people moved on without her. You're thinking about them again? James said quietly, breaking the silence. Aren't you? Lyra didn't look at him, but nodded slowly. I cannot stop thinking about them, about what they said. She paused, her voice growing softer. They were right about one thing. I am a mistake. I was born in a time when I was never meant to exist. My people. Her voice faltered. They wanted perfection, and I am far from perfect. James turned to face her, his expression serious. That's not true, Lyra. You're not a mistake. You're more than they could ever see. She looked at him then, her deep alien eyes searching his face as if trying to understand him. You're kind, James, but you don't know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere, to be different, to be seen as nothing more than an error in the grand design of things. James shook his head. I don't know that, no. But I know that everyone has worth, even if they don't see it themselves. He paused, his voice softening. "And I know that I'm glad I met you." Lyra's lips curved into a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you." They both fell into silence again, each lost in their thoughts. The quiet of the planet seemed to wrap around them, offering a strange sense of comfort. But James knew that the peace wouldn't last. They had both sensed the danger the day before. The Valerians would return, and they wouldn't forget Lyra's defiance. Later that afternoon, James took the time to fully check over his ship. The repairs were holding up, but he knew it wouldn't be long before he needed to make adjustments. He'd never been one to rely on anything for too long, especially not something as unpredictable as this alien world. The ship was his ticket home, but it was also the only means of safety he had right now. As he worked, Lyra approached him quietly. She had changed into something more practical, though still regal in its own way. The clothing suited her well, and for the first time, James realized that she didn't just look like royalty, she carried herself like it too. It was in the way she moved, the way she held herself with quiet dignity. "James," she said softly. Breaking his concentration, he looked up at her, wiping grease from his hands. "I wanted to thank you again for standing up to them. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." He gave her a small smile, trying to ease her worries. "It's nothing. I couldn't just stand by and let them treat you like that." Lyra nodded, looking down at the ground for a moment, her expression distant. "I've always been alone. Even when I was surrounded by my people, I was still isolated. Now, it's different. I feel like I don't belong anywhere, but at the same time, I don't want to go back to them." James leaned against the side of his ship, watching her closely. "You don't have to go back to them," he said gently. "You don't owe them anything." She met his gaze, a slight frown on her face. "I know. But the truth is, I don't know where I belong anymore. I was never accepted by my people. And now I'm not sure where to go, what to do." James thought for a moment before speaking. "You belong here, Lyra. You've survived alone on this planet for so long. You've got strength. You don't need their approval." The words seemed to resonate with her, though she still looked unsure. She glanced around at the empty desert landscape. "But it's not just about survival, it's about meaning. Want to know that there's more to my life than just existing?" James could see the sadness in her eyes, the weight of all she had been through. He understood what it was like to feel like life had no direction, no purpose. He had been through enough of that himself. The only thing that had kept him going was the hope of a mission, of something to fight for, something to believe in. Lyra, it seemed, had lost that hope a long time ago. "You're not just surviving, Lyra," James said softly, his voice steady. "You're living, you're choosing what's next, and that's something." She didn't say anything for a long moment, but her expression softened. James couldn't help but notice the way she looked at him, the quiet trust in her eyes. There was something more between them, something he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just about the journey they shared, or the survival of this harsh planet. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had expected. The quiet, however, was shattered when a loud sound echoed across the desert. James immediately snapped to attention, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon, but Lyra placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "It's them," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "They've returned." James looked at her, his expression serious. "We need to be ready. They won't just leave us alone." Lyra nodded, her eyes hardening. "We won't let them." They quickly made their way to the outskirts of the ship. The Valerian ship hovered in the distance. This time, there was no doubt they had come for something, and this time, James would be ready. He wasn't going to let Lyra face them alone. "We'll fight. If we have to," he said, glancing at her. Lyra turned to him, her expression determined. "Yes, together." James nodded, standing by her side, ready for whatever came next. The sun had set, and the air was thick with tension as the Valerian ship slowly descended onto the dry, cracked ground. Its massive shadow cast over the landscape, blocking out the stars. The hum of its engines still echoed in the distance, a constant reminder that the confrontation was inevitable. James stood beside Princess Lyra, both of them facing the ship. His hand rested on the weapon at his side, though he knew it wouldn't do much against the advanced technology the Valerians controlled. Still, it was the only defense he had. Lyra stood tall beside him, her posture proud, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "They won't leave us alone," James said, his voice low. "Not after what happened last time." Lyra nodded silently. She had already made up her mind. No matter what the Valerians wanted, she would not let them take control of her life again. She'd been abandoned once, and she wouldn't let it happen a second time. The ship finally touched down with a soft thud, and the ramp lowered with a slow mechanical hiss. The Valerians emerged in a group, all wearing the same robes. But their leader, the woman with the silver crown, stepped forward first. Lyra's gaze hardened the moment she saw her, and James could feel the shift in the air. The princess wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever they had to say, she was done being their subject. "You've come again," Lyra said, her voice strong.
Oh.
"What do you want now?" The Valerian leader sneered at her, clearly not expecting the princess to be so bold. "You continue to defy us, Lyra," she said coldly. "The council has made its decision. You cannot escape your fate." James took a step forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Lyra. He wasn't sure what the Valerians were planning, but he wouldn't let them intimidate her. "If you think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do, you're wrong," he said firmly. The leader's eyes flicked to him, her gaze sharp and dismissive. "A human soldier who thinks he can stop us?" She laughed softly. "You are nothing but a tool in this world. You don't belong here." James clenched his fists but stayed calm. "I might be human, but that doesn't mean I'll just stand by and let you treat people however you want." Lyra looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. There was something in her eyes, a quiet appreciation for the support he was offering. For once she wasn't alone. The Valerian leader took another step forward, her eyes narrowing. "You are weak, both of you," she said with contempt. "You don't understand the gravity of your actions." James didn't flinch. "Maybe not. But we understand one thing for sure," he said. "You don't get to dictate how anyone lives, not anymore." There was a brief moment of silence, and then the leader's expression darkened. "You may think you have power here, but you are wrong. The Valerian Council has decreed your fate, Lyra. You will return with us, or we will force you." James felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what that meant to Lyra's life. Her future would be decided by people who hadn't even cared enough to show up when she needed them. She had been left behind like a piece of forgotten history, but now they wanted to bring her back. To control her once more, Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locking with the leader's. "You can try to force me, but I will not go back with you. You abandoned me once. I'll not let you make the same mistake again." The leader's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't move. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed. "You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities?" Lyra shook her head. "I have no responsibilities to you. Not anymore. I am not your pawn." For the first time, the Valerian leader seemed taken aback. She wasn't used to anyone, especially not a member of her own people, defying her so openly. "You are nothing," she spat. "You always have been a mistake." Lyra stood tall, unshaken. "Then let it be known. If I am a mistake, then I am one that has survived, one that has fought to be free. You do not own me. You never will again." The air around them felt charged, the tension thick as the ground beneath their feet. James stood beside Lyra, his gaze fixed on the leader. He wasn't sure what the Valerians would do next, but he was ready. If they tried to take Lyra, he would fight. The leader's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You are brave, Lyra, but you are foolish. You will regret this." She turned to her people, signaling them to follow her. "We will return for you, and when we do, you will not have a choice." Lyra didn't respond. She simply watched as they retreated up the ramp into their ship. Once the door was sealed, the Valerians took off, their ship disappearing into the sky in a blur. The moment they were gone, James let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Lyra, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" Lyra stood still, watching the sky where the ship had vanished. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was steady. I'm fine, it's hard. To believe they could think of me that way. To them, I'm just a mistake, a problem to be dealt with. James shook his head. They're wrong. You're not a mistake. You're a survivor, and you've proven that you don't need them. Lyra looked at him, her eyes softer now. Thank you, James, for everything. He gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to thank me. I'm not going to let them hurt you. Not now, not ever. Lyra's eyes gleamed with something like hope. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She had someone by her side, someone who believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, they stood together in silence, knowing that the fight wasn't over yet, but they were ready. They would face whatever came next together. The days that followed were quiet, but the tension was always there, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. James and Lyra spent their time preparing for what was to come. The Valerians had made their threats clear, but Lyra's defiance had left them shaken. Still, James knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. The Valerians never forgot, and they never forgave. James worked tirelessly on his ship, fine-tuning every system and ensuring that it was ready for flight. He knew that the time would come when they would need to leave the planet, and when that time came, they had to be ready. Lyra stayed by his side, offering her help wherever she could. She had been taught the ways of her people, and although her skills were not those of a mechanic, she had a sharp mind and a determination that could not be ignored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of red and gold, Lyra stood on a small hill overlooking the vast, empty plains. James had just finished a repair on the ship's engine and had joined her, wiping the sweat from his brow. It's beautiful here, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked out over the landscape, taking in the sight. Of the barren world, it was a place of extremes, hot during the day, cold at night, with little to no life to be found. Yet, in the quiet of the evening, there was a strange beauty to it, a sense of peace that felt almost unnatural. It was the calm before the storm, the silence that would soon be shattered. It is, James agreed, his voice low. But it's not where you belong. Lyra didn't look at him, but nodded slowly. I know. I've never truly belonged anywhere. But for the first time, I feel. She paused, trying to find the right words. I feel like I'm not just running from my past. I feel like I'm finally able to choose what comes next. James watched her closely, understanding the weight of her words. Lyra had been abandoned by her people, left to survive on a world that most would consider a death sentence. But she had survived, and now she was choosing her future, her path. That path was no longer tied to her past. It was her own. You've come a long way, James said quietly, stepping closer to her. I'm proud of you. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes soft with gratitude. I've had to. You've shown me that I don't have to carry the weight of my past anymore. I can move forward, and that's because of you. James smiled slightly. You don't owe me anything, Lyra. You did this on your own. But Lyra shook her head. No, James. I never would have made it this far without you. For a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. Words weren't needed. They had both been through so much, and in the end, they'd found something in each other. It was a bond formed through survival, through shared hardship, and through the quiet trust that had grown between them. I've been thinking, Lyra said after a long pause, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. When they come back, I won't go with them. I can't. But I'm afraid of what they'll do if I don't. James followed her gaze, watching the fading light. He could feel the weight of her fear, but he also knew that the Valerians wouldn't get what they wanted without a fight, and he would be there, standing beside her, no matter what. They won't get to you, Lyra, James said firmly. Not. While I'm here, Lyra glanced at him, her expression grateful, but there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. I don't want you to risk your life for me. James met her gaze, his eyes steady. I'm already risking it. We both are. And I wouldn't have it any other way. For a moment, they simply stood there, side by side, watching the night settle in around them. The sky darkened, and the Stars began to twinkle overhead. It was peaceful, quiet, but James knew that peace was fleeting. The Valerians would come. And when they did, it would be time to face them. Over the next few days, James and Lyra worked together, preparing for the inevitable. They made sure the ship was fully functional, and James taught Lyra everything he knew about space travel. It wasn't easy, but she was a quick learner, and James was impressed by how much she had picked up in such a short time. She may not have been a soldier, but she had the heart of one. And that was more than enough. One evening, as they sat by a small campfire outside the ship, Lyra spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "James, I need to ask you something." He looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" She hesitated. For a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "When we leave this place, when we go out there, what will happen to us?" James frowned slightly, not sure what she meant. "I don't understand." Lyra looked down at the fire, her expression unreadable. "I've never really had anyone to rely on, not like this. I'm not sure what to expect when we leave. I've spent my life running from my past, from my people, and now I'm not just running anymore. I'm choosing something new, something different." James understood now. She was asking about their future, about what came next after they left this planet. And to be honest, he didn't know either. But he knew one thing for sure. Wherever they went, they would go together. "We'll figure it out," James said with a small smile. "One step at a time." "Together," Lyra smiled back, her eyes soft with something he couldn't quite place hope, maybe, or trust. "Together," she repeated, and for the first time, felt like the weight of her past was finally starting to lift. The night grew colder, and the fire crackled between them. But for a brief moment, everything felt right. They were not alone. Anymore, they had each other. But deep down, James knew that the calm they had found would not last. The Valerians would return, and when they did, it would be a fight for survival. But as long as they stood together, James believed they could face anything. The days seemed to stretch on forever as James and Lyra prepared for what was to come. The ship was ready, its engines humming with the promise of escape. But neither of them was ready to leave just yet. They both knew the Valerians would return, and they had to make sure they were ready for whatever would come next. James sat on the ground outside the ship, cleaning his weapon. His hands moved methodically, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Lyra, thinking about the choices she had made, the courage she had shown in standing up to her own people. She had come so far from the woman who had first landed. On this planet, afraid and alone, now she was someone who had learned to fight for herself, someone who had learned to trust again. Lyra, on the other hand, stood at the edge of the camp, staring out over the barren landscape. The wind swept through the dry plains, carrying the dust with it. There was something peaceful about the emptiness of the world. It was a place where one could think, where one could find clarity. But Lyra was far from clear. She still had so many questions about what her future would look like. She turned her head, her eyes catching James as he worked. He had been her constant, the one person who had never looked at her with judgment. He had never made her feel less than she was, even when she had doubted herself. She had come to realize that, in many ways, James had become more than just a companion, yet become her anchor, the one person she could rely on. "James," she called softly, her voice carrying across the quiet night. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Yeah, I've been thinking," Lyra said, walking over to where he sat, "about what comes next. After we leave this planet, what happens to us?" James stopped what he was doing, setting the weapon down beside him. He wasn't sure how to answer her. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen next. They were both still figuring it out, still trying to find their way in. World that seemed to keep throwing obstacles at them. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice honest. "But we'll figure it out. We've been through a lot already, and we made it through together. We'll make it through whatever's next to." Lyra sat down next to him, her eyes searching the horizon. "I don't want to go back to my people. Can't. They treated me like I was nothing. But I don't want to be alone either. I don't know what to do. James understood her fear. It was a fear he had felt too in different ways. The fear of being alone, of not knowing where to turn next. But he had learned that sometimes you didn't need all the answers. Sometimes you just had to take the first step and trust that the rest would follow. "You're not alone," James said, his voice steady. "You've got me, and I've got you. We'll figure this out together, step by step." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spent so much of her life carrying the burden of her past, of the things that had happened to her. But now, with James by her side, she felt like she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. "I never thought I'd find someone who would. Believe in me," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "But you've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." James smiled gently. "I always believed in you. You just had to see it for yourself." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft rustling of the wind. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. They had a bond that nothing could break, a connection that had been forged in the heat of battle and tempered by trust. But as the night wore on, they both knew that their peaceful time was coming to an end. The Valerians would return. They had made their threats clear. And Lyra knew they wouldn't stop until they had her back. The ship was ready to fly, but Lyra had one last thing to do before they left this planet behind for good. "I have to face them," she said, standing up suddenly. "I can't keep running. If they come back, I'll face them. I'll show them that I'm not their mistake. I'm my own person now." James stood up, too, his eyes locked on hers. "Are you sure? We can leave just the two of us. We don't have to deal with them." Lyra shook her head, her expression firm. "I've spent my whole life running from them, from what they want me to be. I can't keep doing that. I have to face them, and I have to do it on my own terms." James nodded, understanding her decision. "I'll be with you every step of the way." Lyra smiled, her eyes softening. "I know. And that's enough." The wind picked up again, swirling the dust around them, but this time it didn't feel as harsh. The storm that had been brewing was no longer something to fear, but something they would face together. The next morning, they prepared for the inevitable. Lyra stood by the ship, watching the horizon for any sign of the Valerian ship. James worked quietly, making sure everything was in order. The time for waiting was over. The Valerians were coming, and they had to be ready. As the ship finally appeared in the distance, hovering above the planet like a dark shadow, Lyra took a deep breath. It was time. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had come so far, and now she was ready to take control of her own fate. James stood beside her, his presence a steadying force. "We'll face them together," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her heart steady. Together. The Valerian ship landed, and the ramp lowered with a soft hiss. The familiar figures stepped out, their leader at the front. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Lyra. "This is where it ends, Lyra," the leader said coldly. "You have no place here. You will return with us." Lyra stepped forward, her posture straight, her voice unwavering. "No, I'm not going back with you. I've made my choice. I don't need your approval." The leader sneered, but this time, Lyra didn't back down. She stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Lyra felt like she had control over her own future, and that was all that mattered.